The Duke of Ashford had not spoken a full sentence to his bride in the 3 months since their wedding. This was not cruelty, he told himself. It was simply the way of things. The marriage had been arranged with all the precision of a military campaign, signatures affixed to parchment, settlements agreed upon, estates consolidated. He had done his duty to his name, to his lineage, to the succession that stretched back 7 generations. What more could be expected of him? Alexander Blackwood, 6th Duke of Ashford, stood at the window of his London townhouse, watching the rain trace silver lines down the glass. Behind him, in the drawing room, his wife sat with her embroidery. He could hear the faint whisper of thread through fabric, the soft rustle of her gown when she shifted position. He did not turn to look at her. He had learned, in these months, to exist in the same rooms without truly seeing her. It was easier that way. She had been Lady Eleanor Whitmore before the wedding, daughter of the Earl of Pembroke. A perfectly suitable match. She possessed beauty, breeding, and a dowry that had restored 3 of his tenant farms. The Tun had called it the wedding of the season. He had stood beside her at the altar in Westminster Abbey, repeating vows in a voice that echoed through the vast stone space, and felt nothing but the weight of expectation pressing down upon his shoulders. The problem, if it could be called a problem, was that Eleanor had arrived at their marriage, with hope in her eyes. He had seen it on their wedding night, when she had waited for him in the Duchess's chambers, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the ivory silk of her nightgown. She had looked at him with something approaching tenderness, and he had felt a stirring of panic so profound that he had simply bowed, murmured a few words about allowing her to rest, and retreated to his own chambers. He had not returned since. Their life had settled into a pattern of careful avoidance. They breakfasted separately. They occupied different wings of the house. When society demanded their joint appearance, at dinners, at the theatre, at the endless succession of balls that marked the London season, they performed their roles with the precision of actors who had rehearsed their parts but shared no genuine connection. She would take his arm. He would lead her onto the dance floor. They would move through the figures of the waltz in perfect synchronization, their bodies close enough to observe propriety, distant enough to avoid true intimacy. He told himself he was protecting her. He told himself that a woman like Eleanor, gentle, well-bred, romantic, deserved better than the emptiness he carried inside him. He told himself that by maintaining this distance he was being merciful. But sometimes, late at night, he would hear her moving through the corridors of the house, her footsteps soft against the marble floors, and he would grip the edges of his desk until his knuckles whitened, fighting the urge to go to her. "Your Grace?" Her voice startled him from his thoughts. He turned slowly, keeping his expression neutral, arranging his features into the mask of aristocratic indifference he had perfected over years of practice. Eleanor stood near the fireplace, her embroidery abandoned on the chair beside her. She wore a gown of deep blue silk that made her skin seem luminous in the firelight. Her dark eyes met his with a directness that always unsettled him, as though she could see through all his carefully constructed defenses to the man beneath. "Yes?" He kept his tone clipped, professional, the voice he might use with his steward. She hesitated, and he saw her fingers twist together, a nervous gesture she tried to hide by clasping her hands at her waist. "I wondered if you might join me for tea this afternoon. Lady Hartwell has invited us both, but I thought perhaps we might arrive together, rather than—" She trailed off, and he knew what she meant to say. Rather than arriving separately as they always did, rather than maintaining the polite fiction that they were simply 2 people who happened to share a name and a house and nothing more. "I have business with my solicitor," he said, the lie coming easily. He always had business. There was always something that required his attention: estate matters, investments, correspondence that could not wait. He saw the light in her eyes dim, just fractionally, and felt something twist in his chest. But she recovered quickly, as she always did, her composure settling back into place like a mask. "Of course," she said quietly. "Forgive me for interrupting your work." She turned to leave, and he should have let her go. He should have returned to his position at the window, to his contemplation of the rain and the grey London afternoon. Instead, he heard himself speak. "Eleanor." She stopped, her hand on the doorframe, but did not turn around. The line of her spine was very straight, her shoulders held with the perfect posture instilled by years of governesses and deportment lessons. "You look well," he said, and immediately felt the inadequacy of the words. They were nothing. They meant nothing. She glanced back at him over her shoulder, and for a moment he thought he saw something raw in her expression, something like pain or anger or a grief too profound for tears. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said, and then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft click that sounded to his ears like a judgment. He stood alone in the drawing room listening to the rain and told himself that this was for the best. That distance was safety. That feeling nothing was better than feeling too much. But that night, as he sat in his study with a glass of brandy untouched beside him, he found himself thinking about the way she had looked at him on their wedding day, the hope in her eyes, the belief that perhaps, against all the odds imposed by arrangement and duty, they might find something real. He had killed that hope methodically, day by day, with every avoided conversation, every separate meal, every night spent in chambers far from hers. He told himself he had no choice. He told himself this was who he was, the Duke of Ashford, cold and distant and beyond the reach of such common emotions as longing or regret. He told himself these things until he almost believed them. Almost. There had been a woman before. Eleanor. Her name had been Catherine, and she had destroyed him so completely that he had sworn never to allow another woman close enough to wield such power again. Alexander stood in the portrait gallery of Ashford Hall, his ancestral estate in Derbyshire, gazing up at the paintings of his forebears. Dukes and duchesses stretching back 2 centuries, their faces stern and proud, their eyes following him with what felt like accusation. They had all done their duty. They had all married, produced. Heirs maintained the family name. None of them, he imagined, had been fool enough to confuse duty with desire. But he had been young once, young and stupid, and desperately in love. Catherine Thornwood had been the daughter of a baron, beautiful and clever and utterly unsuitable. His father, the 5th Duke, had made that abundantly clear. The Blackwood line did not ally itself with minor nobility. They required connections that brought power, wealth, territory. Catherine had brought him nothing, but laughter and stolen kisses in the garden, and a sense of being truly seen for the first time in his life. He had been 22 and believed that love could conquer the rigid hierarchies of their world. He had gone to his father and asked, begged really, for permission to court her properly. His father had refused with a coldness that still, 15 years later, made Alexander's jaw tighten with remembered humiliation. "You will marry where I direct," the old Duke had said, "or you will marry no one. The choice is yours." Alexander had chosen defiance. He had gone to Catherine with a plan. They would elope to Scotland, marry over the anvil at Gretna Green, present the family with a fait accompli. He had been so certain of her love, so convinced that she would choose him over comfort and status. He had been wrong. When he had arrived at the appointed meeting place, a small inn on the outskirts of London, he had found not Catherine, but a letter. The handwriting had been hers, elegant and familiar. The words had been knives. "Dearest Alexander, forgive me, but I cannot do this. I cannot live in exile from society, cannot bear the whispers and the shame. Your father has made his position clear, and I find I am not brave enough to stand against the weight of his disapproval. I am to marry Lord Helmsworth. He is kind, and his position is secure. I hope you will understand. I hope in time you will forgive me. I did love you. Please believe that. But love is not enough." Catherine, he, had stood in that inn holding the letter and felt something inside him calcify into stone. His father had orchestrated it all, of course, had offered Catherine something, money, security, an alternative marriage that would preserve her reputation, and she had taken it, had chosen comfort over him, had proven that his father was right about everything. Love was weakness, sentiment was dangerous, and trusting anyone with your heart was the greatest folly of all. He had returned to London, had thrown himself into the role his father demanded. He had become the perfect heir, cold, dutiful, focused entirely on the preservation and expansion of the Ashford legacy. When his father died 3 years later, Alexander had assumed the title with no sense of triumph, only grim acceptance. He was the Duke now. The title was everything. The man beneath it was nothing. And then his mother had arranged his marriage to Eleanor, and he had agreed because it was expected, because Eleanor's family had the right connections and the right bloodlines, because refusing would have required him to explain why he could not marry, could not allow himself to feel, could not risk the kind of devastation that came from trusting someone with the fragile pieces of yourself. Now, standing in the portrait gallery, he wondered if Eleanor had any idea what she had married. A title, certainly. An estate. A fortune. But not a man. Not really. Just the carefully maintained shell of one, hollow and echoing and desperately afraid. Your Grace? He turned to find Eleanor herself standing in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill that pervaded the old house. They had been at Ashford Hall for 2 weeks, having left London for the country as the season ended. Here, without the constant demands of society, their avoidance of each other had become almost absolute. They could go days without speaking, moving through the vast halls like ghosts, haunting different centuries. "I did not mean to disturb you," she said softly. "I was walking and saw the light." He should tell her to leave, should maintain the careful distance he had cultivated so assiduously. Instead, he found himself gesturing to the portraits. "My family," he said unnecessarily. 7 generations of Dukes of Ashford. She moved into the room, her footsteps quiet on the polished wood floor. She stopped beside him, tilting her head to study the portrait he had been contemplating. His father, painted in his prime, all arrogance and aristocratic bearing. "You have his eyes," she observed. "Unfortunately." The word slipped out before he could stop it, carrying more bitterness than he had intended. He felt Eleanor glance at him, curiosity and something else, concern perhaps, flickering across her face. "You did not admire him," she said. It was not a question. "I was taught to obey him. Admiration was never discussed." She was silent for a moment, and he could feel her watching him, trying to understand. It made him profoundly uncomfortable, this sense of being studied, of having her gentle attention focused on him with such intensity. "I think," she said carefully, "that you carry more weight than any one man should have to bear." He felt something crack inside him at her words, some small fissure in the stone walls he had built around himself. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he carried nothing but the privileges and responsibilities appropriate to his station. He wanted to turn to her and explain about Catherine, about his father, about all the reasons he had locked himself away. He wanted to close the space between them and discover if her lips were as soft as they looked, if her body would fit against his, with the same inevitability he sometimes imagined in the darkest hours of the night. Instead, he stepped back, putting distance between them, rebuilding the walls as quickly as she had threatened to breach them. "We should dress for dinner," he said, his voice formal once more. "Mrs. Henderson will have prepared something." He saw Eleanor's expression shudder, saw her withdraw into her own careful composure. She nodded once, sharply, and turned to leave. But at the doorway she paused. "Alexander," she said, the first time she had used his Christian name since their wedding. "Whatever happened to make you this way, I wish you would trust me enough to tell me. I am your wife. I want to understand." Then she was gone, leaving him alone with the portraits and the you. Ghosts of all the dukes who had come before, all of them silently demanding that he maintain the facade, that he never allow himself the weakness of hope, the danger of love. He stood there until the light faded from the windows, until the gallery filled with shadows, and told himself that he had made the right choice, told himself, and almost believed it. Almost. The letter arrived 3 weeks after their return to London, delivered on heavy cream paper embossed with the Marquis of Ravenscroft's seal. Alexander sat at his desk in the study, the Morning Post spread before him, and felt his jaw tighten as he read the elegant script. Lord Ravenscroft was hosting a ball, one of the grandest of the season, and requested the honor of the Duke and Duchess of Ashford's attendance. He had no particular reason to refuse. Ravenscroft was an old acquaintance, their families had been allies for generations, and society expected their presence at such events. But something about the invitation made him uneasy, though he could not have articulated why. Eleanor received her own invitation that afternoon. He knew because he heard her exclamation of pleasure from the morning room, a sound so rare in their silent house that it drew him from his study despite his better judgment. She stood by the window, the invitation held in her hands, her face transformed by genuine delight. "Lord Ravenscroft's ball," she said when she noticed him in the doorway. "I had not realized he was in. Sat down. We were great friends as children. Our estates bordered each other in Hertfordshire. I have not seen him in years." Something cold settled in Alexander's chest. "You were friends?" "Oh yes, quite close. Edmund used to sneak through the hedge to bring me books he thought I would enjoy. My father disapproved of novels, but Edmund had quite the collection." Her smile was wistful, nostalgic. "He was always terribly kind. Edmund." She spoke his Christian name with such easy familiarity, such obvious affection. Alexander felt his hands clench at his sides. "I see," he said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "Then you will wish to attend. If it pleases you, Your Grace." It did not please him. Not at all. But he could hardly refuse without revealing the irrational jealousy that had seized him, jealousy he had no right to feel, given how thoroughly he had rejected any claim to his wife's heart. "Very well," he said. "We shall attend." The ball was held at Ravenscroft House in Tyde's, Mayfair, a magnificent Georgian mansion that glittered with candlelight and rang with music when their carriage arrived. Alexander helped Eleanor down, his hand on her elbow, the only point of contact between them. She wore ivory silk trimmed with gold, sapphires at her throat, the Ashford sapphires which his mother had presented to her after the wedding. She looked like a duchess, poised and elegant, and utterly beyond his reach. They were announced at the top of the stairs, and Alexander saw heads turn throughout the ballroom, the Duke and Duchess of Ashford together at last. The whispers followed them as they descended, speculation about their marriage, about the distance everyone had observed. He kept his expression impassive, his hand steady on Eleanor's arm, even as he felt the weight of judgment pressing down upon them both. Lord Ravenscroft met them at the bottom of the stairs. He was tall and fair-haired, with an open, honest face, and eyes that lit with genuine warmth when he saw Eleanor. Alexander felt his jaw tighten as Ravenscroft took Eleanor's hand and bowed over it with more than perfunctory courtesy. "Eleanor," Ravenscroft said, familiarity in every syllable. "You are lovelier than I remembered. Marriage clearly agrees with you." Alexander heard the lie in those words. Marriage had not agreed with Eleanor. He had seen the way the light in her eyes had dimmed over the past months, the way her smiles had become increasingly rare, and now, watching her face brighten in response to Ravenscroft's attention, he understood what he had done to her. "Edmund, how wonderful to see you," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying a warmth Alexander had never heard directed at him. "It has been far too long." "Indeed, we must remedy that immediately. The first waltz, if your husband permits." Both of them turned to Alexander, waiting. He should refuse, should claim the dance himself, assert his rights as her husband. Instead, he inclined his head with aristocratic courtesy. "Of course," he said, his voice ice. "I am certain my wife would enjoy renewing old acquaintances." He saw something flicker in Eleanor's eyes, surprise perhaps, or disappointment. But then Ravenscroft was leading her onto the floor, and the music was beginning, and Alexander was left standing at the edge of the ballroom, watching his wife waltz with another man. They moved beautifully together. Ravenscroft held her with easy confidence, and Eleanor followed his lead with a grace that made Alexander's chest constrict. They were speaking as they danced, their heads close together, and he could see Eleanor laughing at something Ravenscroft said. Actually laughing, a sound of pure joy that he had not heard from her since their wedding day. He should look away, should circulate through the ballroom, fulfill his social obligations, demonstrate the indifference he had worked so hard to cultivate. Instead, he stood frozen, watching, feeling something dark and possessive uncurl in his chest. She was his wife, his, and yet he had given her no reason to remember that fact, had treated her with such cold courtesy that she might as well have been a stranger, had denied her every kindness, every gentle word, every moment of true connection that a wife might reasonably expect from her husband. The waltz ended. Ravenscroft bowed over Eleanor's hand again, holding it a moment too long. Then another gentleman approached, Lord Helmsley, young and charming and clearly delighted to make Eleanor's acquaintance. Alexander watched as she was led back onto the floor, watched as she smiled at Helmsley with that same warmth she had shown Ravenscroft. The evening became torture. Dance after dance, partner after partner. Eleanor moved through the ballroom like a star, drawing admirers with her grace and beauty and the ineffable quality of loneliness that clung to her despite the crowd. And Alexander stood apart, refusing to dance, refusing to approach her, locked in the prison of his own pride. Near midnight, he saw Ravenscroft escort Eleanor onto the terrace. They disappeared through the French doors into the garden beyond, and Alexander felt panic seize his throat. He should trust her, should remember that she was the Duchess of Ashford, bound by vows and duty and the strict codes of their society. But trust required vulnerability, and vulnerability was something he had sworn never to permit himself again. He followed them. The garden was lit with lanterns, paths winding, between carefully manicured hedges. He could hear their voices ahead, Eleanor's soft laughter, Ravenscroft's deeper tones. He moved silently, keeping to the shadows, and hated himself for this cowardice even as he continued forward. He found them beside a fountain seated on a stone bench. Ravenscroft had removed his gloves, and his hand covered Eleanor's where it rested on her lap. They sat close enough that their shoulders touched, intimate in a way that made Alexander's vision blur with rage. "You deserve better than this, Eleanor," Ravenscroft was saying, his voice low and earnest. "Everyone can see that Ashford neglects you. If you were mine, but I am not yours, Edmund." Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. "I am married. Those vows mean something to me even if they appear to mean nothing to my husband. Then leave him. Divorces can be arranged if one has cause, and neglect is cause enough, in my opinion. Edmund, please." Eleanor withdrew her hand from his, placing distance between them on the bench. "I appreciate your concern, truly, but this is my life, my choice. I knew when I married Alexander that it was an arrangement. I simply hoped, well, it does not matter what I hoped." Alexander felt those words like a blade between his ribs. He should step forward, should announce his presence, should do something. Instead, he remained frozen, listening. "You still have hope," Ravenscroft said softly. "I can see it in your eyes. You still believe he might come to care. For you, then I am a fool. No, you are kind and good, and you deserve a man who sees that, who treasures it. I could be that man, Eleanor. I have always—" "Don't." Eleanor stood abruptly, her skirts rustling in the quiet night. "Please, Edmund, do not say something we will both regret. I am the Duchess of Ashford. That is my reality, and I must find a way to live within it." She turned and walked back toward the house, her spine straight, her head held high. Ravenscroft remained on the quai bench, his head in his hands, the picture of dejection. Alexander stepped from the shadows. "Ravenscroft!" The other man's head snapped up, alarm flashing across his face as he scrambled to his feet. "Ashford, I did not realize, that is, we were merely— Save your explanations." Alexander's voice was deadly calm, though his hands shook with the effort of not reaching for the other man's throat. "You will stay away from my wife. You will not dance with her, speak with her, or approach her in any way. Am I understood?" Ravenscroft's jaw tightened. "With respect, Your Grace, if you do not value what you have, you cannot expect others to refrain from offering her the kindness you deny." The words struck home because they were true. Alexander took a step forward, close enough that Ravenscroft had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. "She is mine," Alexander said, the words emerging from some primitive place he had not known existed. "Whatever else is true, whatever I have done or failed. To do, Eleanor is my wife, and I will not tolerate your interference." He turned and left before Ravenscroft could respond, striding back toward the ballroom with his heart hammering against his ribs. The rage was still there, but beneath it was something else. Fear, raw and overwhelming. Fear that he had waited too long, that his carefully maintained distance had created a chasm too wide to cross. Fear that Eleanor might actually consider Ravenscroft's offer, might choose a man who could give her the warmth and affection Alexander had denied her. Fear that he might lose her, before he even admitted to himself that she had become necessary. He found Eleanor in the ballroom, standing near the refreshment table, her face composed but pale. She looked up as he approached, and he saw something flash in her eyes, anger perhaps, or hurt. "We are leaving," he said, the words coming out more harshly than he intended. "I beg your pardon? Now, Eleanor. We are leaving now." He saw her chin lift, saw the spark of defiance that rarely showed itself. "I am enjoying the ball, Your Grace. If you wish to depart, please do so. I shall find my own way home. You will come with me." He seized her elbow, perhaps more forcefully than necessary, and felt her stiffen. "You are hurting me." He released her immediately, horrified. "Forgive me. We must go. Please." Something in his voice must have convinced her, because she allowed him to escort her to the carriage without further protest. They rode through the dark London streets in silence, the space between them on the bench enormous despite the carriage's close quarters. When they reached the townhouse, Eleanor descended without waiting for his assistance and swept through the entrance hall toward the stairs. He followed, driven by some compulsion he did not fully understand. "Eleanor, wait." She stopped on the landing, turning to face him. In the candlelight, her eyes glittered with unshed tears. "What do you want?" "From me, Alexander." The question emerged raw, all her careful composure stripped away. "You do not speak to me, do not touch me, do not acknowledge my existence except when society demands it. And yet tonight, you dragged me from the only pleasant evening I have had in months because... Why? Because another man showed me kindness, because someone dared to treat me as though I mattered." He stood at the base of the stairs, looking up at her, and felt the walls he had built around himself. Trembling. "He wants you," he said, the words emerging rough. "Ravenscroft. He wants to take you from me. And why should you care?" She descended 2 steps, her eyes blazing. "You have made it abundantly clear that you have no use for me except as a decoration for your arm and a manager for your household. So why, Alexander? Why do you care if another man offers me the affection you so obviously find repugnant?" "I don't..." He stopped, the denial catching in his throat. "It is not repugnant. You are not..." "Then what?" She took another step down, close enough now that he could smell her perfume, see the rapid rise and fall of her chest. "What am I to you? Because I cannot continue like this. I cannot live in this house, bound to a man who cannot even bear to look at me." He should tell her the truth, should explain about Catherine, about his father, about all the ways he had learned that love was weakness and trust was betrayal. Should tell her that he avoided her, not because he found her repugnant, but because she terrified him, because the pull he felt toward her was strong enough to threaten every defense he had spent years constructing. Instead, he said nothing, simply stood there, mute and helpless, as Eleanor's expression shifted from anger to something worse, resignation. "I see," she said quietly. "Then I suppose we have nothing more to discuss." She turned and continued up the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the silent hall. He listened to her go, listened to... The door of her chambers closed with a finality that felt like death, and in the darkness of the entrance hall, Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Ashford, stood alone and admitted to himself, finally, that he was a coward who was losing the only thing that mattered and had no idea how to prevent it. The morning after Ravenscroft's ball, Alexander found Eleanor in the morning room, seated at the small writing desk with correspondence spread before her. She did not look up when he entered, simply continued writing with careful precision, each stroke of her pen deliberate and controlled. He had not slept, had spent the night pacing his chambers, replaying their confrontation on the stairs, the hurt in her eyes, the resignation in her voice when she had turned away from him. And beneath it all, the memory of her hand beneath Ravenscroft's, the intimacy of their conversation in the garden, the casual use of Christian names that spoke of a connection Alexander had never permitted to develop between them. "Eleanor," he began, then stopped, unsure what he had meant to say. She set down her pen and looked at him, her expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace?" The formality stung. They had regressed even from the small progress they had made at Ashford Hall, when she had called him Alexander, when she had tried to reach through his defenses with gentle questions. "About last night," he said, forcing the words through the tightness in his throat. "My behavior was... I should not have spoken to you so harshly." "No, you should not have." She folded her hands in her lap, every inch the proper duchess. "But I understand. You were concerned about appearances, about what others might think if your wife was seen to enjoy another man's company. I shall be more careful in future to maintain the proper facade. That is not... He stopped, frustration rising. How did she manage to make every word sound reasonable while simultaneously cutting him to the bone? It was not about appearances. Then what was it about Alexander? The use of his name was deliberate, a challenge. He could see it in her eyes, the demand that he be honest, that he give her something real instead of the careful distance he had maintained for months. He opened his mouth to answer, and the words that emerged surprised even himself. I do not like the way he looks at you. Eleanor blinked, clearly taken aback. I beg your pardon? Ravenscroft. The way he looks at you, speaks to you, touches your hand as though he has the right. He moved deeper into the room, his hands clenching at his sides. He has no right. You are my wife. In name only. Her voice was quiet but firm. You have made that abundantly clear. Because I... He stopped, trapped between the truth and the safety of lies. Pride won, as it always did. Because it is appropriate. Because our marriage is an arrangement of families and fortunes, not some romantic entanglement. He saw the moment his words landed, saw her flinch, as though he had struck her. The careful neutrality of her expression cracked, revealing the hurt beneath. Of course, she said, her voice brittle. How foolish of me to forget. An arrangement, nothing more. She gathered her correspondence with hands that trembled slightly, rising from the desk with rigid dignity. If you will excuse me, Your Grace, I have letters to post. Eleanor, wait! But she was already moving past him, and he made the fatal mistake of reaching for her arm. She jerked, away from his touch as though burned, turning on him with sudden fury. Do not, she said, her voice shaking, do not touch me with hands that have never offered me a single moment of genuine warmth. Do not pretend now that you feel something when we both know you feel nothing at all. That is not true. Then what do you feel? She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. Tell me, Alexander. Give me one honest emotion. Just one. Because I have felt everything. Hope and disappointment and loneliness and anger and grief, while you have stood apart like a statue, untouched and untouchable. He should have told her then. Should have broken through the walls of pride and fear and confessed that he felt far too much, that she haunted his thoughts and disrupted his sleep, and made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. Should have admitted that seeing her with Ravenscroft had awakened a jealousy so visceral it had nearly driven him to violence. Instead, his pride spoke for him. I feel nothing, he said, the lie smooth and cold. You are correct. This marriage is an obligation I fulfill because duty demands it. If you have romantic notions beyond that, I suggest you abandon them. They will only lead to disappointment. He watched the color drain from her face, watched something die in her eyes, and even as he spoke, he wanted to take the words back, to cross the space between them and prove with actions what his pride would not allow him to say with words. But Eleanor was stepping back, her expression shuttering completely. Thank you, she said quietly, for your honesty. At least now I know where I stand. Eleanor? No. She held up one hand, stopping him. I think we have said quite enough. I shall continue to fulfill my duties as the Duchess of Ashford. I shall manage your household, attend your social obligations, and maintain the appearance of a proper marriage. But I will no longer harbor any illusions about what exists between us. She left then, her spine straight, her head high, every movement controlled and graceful. The perfect Duchess, hiding a shattered heart behind impeccable breeding. Alexander stood alone in the morning room, listening to her footsteps fade, and felt something crack inside his chest. He had done it, had driven her away so completely that she would never again look at him with hope in her eyes, had protected himself so thoroughly that he had destroyed the only thing worth protecting. He moved to the window, staring out at the London street without seeing it. Carriages passed, pedestrians went about their business. The world continued as though nothing of significance had occurred. But Alexander felt as though the ground beneath his feet had shifted, as though he stood at the edge of an abyss of his own making. The days that followed were a new form of torture. Eleanor withdrew into perfect glacial courtesy. She spoke to him only when absolutely necessary, her words clipped and formal. She continued to manage the household with flawless efficiency, continued to appear at his side when society required it. But the woman who had once looked at him with hope, who had tried so hard to reach him, was gone. In her place was a stranger who wore his wife's face and felt nothing at all. He told himself it was for the best, told himself that this cold distance was what he had wanted all along. But at night, lying in his chambers, he could hear her moving through the house, and the sound of her footsteps made his chest constrict with a longing he could no longer deny. 2 weeks after their argument, he encountered her in the library. She was reaching for a book on a high shelf, standing on tiptoe, her fingers just brushing the spine. Without thinking, he crossed the room and retrieved it for her, their hands touching briefly as he handed it to her. The contact lasted only a moment, but it was enough to make his breath catch. She had grown so thin, he noticed. There were shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, and when she looked at him, there was nothing in her gaze, no anger, no hurt, just emptiness. "Thank you," she said, her voice perfectly polite. She turned to leave, and he heard himself speak. "Are you well?" She paused, glancing back at him with something that might have been surprise. "Of course, Your Grace. Why would I not be?" "Because you are fading away," he wanted to say. "Because the light has gone out of your eyes, and it is my fault. Because I am destroying you as surely as I destroyed myself." "No reason," he said instead. You seem tired." "I have not been sleeping well." She hesitated, then added, "The house is very quiet at night." It was an olive branch, he realized, a small admission of loneliness, an invitation for him to say something, to acknowledge that the silence between them was intolerable. He should have taken it, should have told her that he too lay awake, listening for her footsteps, wondering if it was too late to bridge the chasm he had created. Should have admitted that he regretted every cold word, every moment of distance, every choice he had made out of fear. Instead, he simply nodded. "I shall have Mrs. Henderson prepare you a draught to help you sleep." He saw Eleanor's expression close, saw her withdraw again behind the walls of perfect composure. "That will not be necessary," she said. "Good evening, Your Grace." She left him standing in the library, the book still in her hands, and Alexander knew with sudden terrible certainty that he was losing her. Not to Ravenscroft or any other man, but to the emptiness he had created between them. She was slipping away into some distant place where he could not reach her, and it was his own fault for pushing her there. That night, he sat in his study with brandy burning in his glass and Catherine's letter in his hands, the letter he had kept all these years as a reminder of why love was dangerous, why trust was betrayal, why allowing himself to feel was a weakness he could not afford. He read it again, the familiar words that had shaped his life for 15 years. Love is not enough. Catherine had written that, and he had believed it, had made it his creed, his protection, his cage. But sitting there in the darkness, thinking of Eleanor's empty eyes and brittle smile, he wondered if Catherine had been wrong, or rather, if he had misunderstood her meaning. Perhaps love was not enough when it was one-sided, when only one person bore the risk. Perhaps what Catherine had meant was that love without courage, without the willingness to fight for it, was not enough. And Alexander had never fought for anything in his life. He had accepted his father's dictates, accepted the loss of Catherine, accepted the loneliness that had become his constant companion. He had chosen safety over happiness, pride over vulnerability, and called it strength. But there was no strength in what he was doing to Eleanor, only cruelty. The cruelty of a man too afraid to risk his heart, even for a woman who had offered him hers. He stood abruptly, moving to the fireplace. He should burn the letter, should destroy this relic of old pain and step into a new life, should go to Eleanor's chambers and tell her everything, about Catherine, about his fear, about the way she made him feel things he had thought himself incapable of feeling. But as he held the letter over the flames, his hand would not release it. The old fear was still there, whispering that vulnerability led to destruction, that trust led to betrayal, that loving anyone was giving them the power to destroy you. He pulled the letter back from the fire, folding it carefully, placing it back in the drawer where it had lived for 15 years. And with that action, he sealed both their fates. He did not know it then, but the choice had already been made. He had chosen fear over love, protection over connection, and in doing so, had set in motion the events that would bring him to his knees. The breaking point was coming, and when it arrived, Alexander would discover that there were things worse than the pain of betrayal, things like the agony of losing someone you had never admitted you loved. The invitation arrived on a grey October morning, delivered with the rest of the post. Alexander noticed it because Eleanor's hands trembled when she opened it, her face going pale as she read the contents. "What is it?" he asked, setting down his newspaper. They were breakfasting together for the first time in weeks, a concession to his mother's impending visit, as the Dowager Duchess would certainly notice if they maintained separate schedules. Eleanor looked up, and he saw something in her eyes he could not quite identify. Fear, perhaps, or determination. "My aunt has invited me to Bath," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "She is unwell and requests my assistance in managing her household. How long would you be gone?" She does not specify. Several weeks at least, perhaps longer depending on her condition. Alexander felt something cold settle in his chest. Several weeks without Eleanor in the house. Several weeks of rooms that felt empty even when she occupied them, of silence that had become his punishment and his prison. "I see," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "And you wish to accept?" She met his eyes, and he saw the challenge in her gaze. "Do I have your permission to leave, Your Grace?" He should say no. Should tell her that her place was here at his side, fulfilling the duties they had sworn to uphold. Should admit that the thought of her absence filled him with a panic he did not fully understand. But pride, as always, spoke for him. "If your aunt requires your assistance, it would be uncharitable to refuse." He watched something flicker across her face. Disappointment, he thought, though she hid it quickly. "Then I shall make the arrangements," she said quietly. "I thought I might depart at the end of the week. 3 days. She would be gone in 3 days. He nodded, returning his attention to the newspaper he was no longer reading. "Very well." Eleanor rose from the table, her breakfast barely touched. At the doorway she paused. "Alexander." He looked up, and for a moment saw the woman she had been on their wedding day. Hopeful and nervous, and so very young. But the hope was gone now, replaced by something that looked very much like resignation. "Yes?" She opened her mouth, seemed to struggle with something, then simply shook her head. "Nothing. Forgive me." She left, and Alexander sat alone at the table, staring at her abandoned plate, and felt the first stirrings of real fear. The 3 days passed too quickly. He watched Eleanor prepare for her departure with the same efficiency she brought to all her tasks. Trunks were packed, arrangements made, letters sent ahead to Bath. She moved through the house like a ghost, speaking to the servants, organizing her affairs, saying nothing to him beyond the polite necessities. The night before she was to leave, Alexander found himself standing outside her chambers, his hand raised to knock. He could hear her moving within, the soft sounds of final preparations. He should go to her, should step through that door and tell her not to go. Tell her that the house would be unbearable without her. Tell her that he was sorry for every cold word and every moment of distance. His hand fell back to his side. He returned to his own chambers and poured himself a brandy he did not drink, staring into the fire until the embers died to ash. The morning of her departure was grey and drizzling, the London streets slick with rain. Alexander watched from the study window as the servants loaded her trunks onto the carriage. Eleanor appeared in the entrance hall in a travelling dress of dark blue, a bonnet shading her face. She looked small and fragile, nothing like the Duchess who had managed his household with such quiet competence. He should go to her, should at least see her off properly. He remained at the window, frozen by something he refused to name as fear. He heard the front door open, heard the murmur of servants' voices, heard the carriage door close with a finality that made his chest constrict. Only then did he move to the window, watching as the carriage pulled away from the townhouse and disappeared into the rain. And standing there alone in the study, Alexander Blackwood finally admitted to himself what he had known for months but been too cowardly to acknowledge. He loved her, loved Eleanor with a depth that terrified him, with a fierceness that made all his careful defenses seem like the pathetic constructions they were. He had loved her since their wedding day, perhaps even before, had loved the hope in her eyes and the gentle way she tried to reach him and the quiet dignity with which she bore his coldness. And he had driven her away. The house became a mausoleum in Eleanor's absence. Alexander tried to return to his old routines, the business with his steward, the meetings with his solicitor, the endless social obligations that filled the days of a duke. But everything reminded him of her, the morning room where she had sat with her correspondence, the library where she had reached for books on high shelves, the drawing room where she had worked on her embroidery while he stood at the window, too proud to cross the space between them. He began writing letters to her, long rambling things that he never sent, in which he tried to explain about Catherine, about his father, about all the ways he had learned to protect himself, and in doing so had become someone not worth protecting. He wrote about the night he had stood outside her chambers and been too afraid to knock. He wrote about watching her waltz with Ravenscroft and feeling his world tilt on its axis. He wrote about loving her and being terrified of what that love meant. The letters piled up in his desk. Drawer, unsent. What good were words on paper when he had proven with actions that he was incapable of the vulnerability love required? A week passed. Then 2. He received brief notes from Eleanor, formal and perfunctory, informing him that her aunt's condition was improving, but that her presence was still required. He read each note multiple times, searching for any sign of warmth, any indication that she missed him even fractionally as much as he missed her. There was nothing, just duty and distance and the careful courtesy that had become her armor against him. The 3rd week, his mother arrived from Ashford Hall. The Dowager Duchess swept into his study without knocking, her sharp eyes taking in the disorder, the unwashed brandy glasses, the neglected correspondence, the general air of desolation that had settled over the room. "Alexander," she said without preamble, "you look dreadful." "Good morning, Mother. How kind of you to notice." She ignored his sarcasm, settling herself in the chair across from his desk with the regal bearing she had never lost. "Where is Eleanor?" "Bath. Her aunt required her assistance." "Her aunt is in perfect health and has been for years." "Try again." Alexander felt his jaw tighten. "Then perhaps you should ask Eleanor why she chose to leave." "I am asking you why she chose to leave. Or rather, why you drove her away." He stood abruptly, moving to the window, the same window where he had watched Eleanor's carriage disappear into the rain. "I did not drive her anywhere. She made her own choice." "Alexander Christopher Blackwood." His mother's voice was sharp enough to make him turn. "I raised you better than to lie, especially to yourself. That girl arrived at this marriage with hope in her eyes and left it with none. What did you do to her?" "Nothing," he said, the word bitter. "That is precisely the problem. I did nothing." His mother was silent for a long moment, studying him with the perceptiveness that had always unnerved him. "You are afraid," she said finally. "I am not. You are afraid," she repeated, "just as your father was afraid, and just as his fear made him cold and cruel and ultimately alone. Yours will do the same to you." Alexander felt something crack in his chest. Father was never afraid of anything. Your father was terrified of everything. His mother's voice was softer now, almost gentle. He was terrified of feeling too much, of losing control, of appearing weak. So he built walls around himself and called it strength. And he died alone in that vast house, surrounded by everything he had protected and nothing that mattered. She rose, moving to stand beside him at the window. "I loved your father, Alexander, but I also saw what his fear cost him, cost both of us, and I will not watch you make the same mistakes." "It is too late," he said quietly. "I have already." "It is never too late." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle. "Not if you are willing to fight for it. But you must decide what you want more, the safety of your pride or the risk of your heart." After his mother left, Alexander sat in the study as the afternoon light faded to evening. The rain had begun again, drumming against the windows, the same rain that had fallen the day Eleanor left. He thought about his father alone in Ashford Hall, surrounded by the duchy he had spent his life protecting, and no one who mourned his passing beyond duty. He thought about Catherine and the lesson he had drawn from her betrayal, that love was weakness, that trust led to pain, that the only safety lay in feeling nothing. But what if the real lesson was different? What if the weakness was not in loving, but in refusing to love? What if the pain of loneliness was worse than any betrayal could ever be? He pulled open the desk drawer and removed all the letters he had written to Eleanor, dozens of them, filled with confessions he had been too afraid to speak aloud. He read through them, seeing his own cowardice, laid bare in black ink. Then he took a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Not a long letter this time, not a rambling explanation, just the truth, simple and terrible and absolutely essential. Eleanor, I was wrong about everything. I chose fear over love, pride over vulnerability, and in doing so I hurt the only person who mattered. I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, no claim to your affection, no reason to hope that you might return. But I am asking anyway, not because I deserve it, but because I cannot bear the thought of living the rest of my life without trying. I love you. I have loved you since our wedding day, though I was too much a coward to admit it. I love the hope you carried into our marriage, even when I gave you no reason for hope. I love the dignity with which you bore my coldness. I love your kindness and your strength, and the way you tried so hard to reach me when I had given you nothing but walls. If you return to London, I promise, you a different man. Not perfect. I am too damaged for that, but honest, vulnerable, willing to risk the pain of loving you rather than the emptiness of safety. If you do not return, I will understand. I will not pursue you or attempt to compel you. You deserve the freedom to choose your own path, even if that path leads away from me. But know this, whatever you decide, wherever you go, you carry my heart with you. Yours, Alexander. He sealed the letter and sent it with a rider that very night, marked urgent. Then he waited, counting the days it would take to reach Bath, the hours Eleanor would need to read it and decide. 5 days passed in agony. 6, 7. On the 8th day, he received her reply. The letter was brief, just 3 lines in Eleanor's elegant script. Your Grace, I received your letter. I need time to consider what you have written. I shall send word when I have made my decision. Eleanor, not yours, not even with regards, just her name, stark and final. Alexander read the letter again and again, searching for any hint of warmth, any sign that his confession had moved her. There was nothing, just careful neutrality and the distance he had taught her to maintain. He told himself it was no more than he deserved, told himself he should be grateful she had even responded, told himself that whatever she decided, he would respect her choice. But late at night, alone in chambers that had never felt more empty, Alexander Blackwood allowed himself to hope and to fear. That hope had come too late. The weeks in Bath stretched into a month, and Alexander felt himself unraveling thread by thread. He went through the motions of his life, estate business, correspondence, the occasional social obligation, but everything felt hollow, provisional, as though he were merely marking time until Eleanor made her decision. He had sent one letter, only one. He would not bombard her with declarations, would not press his suit when she had asked for time. But the waiting was excruciating, each day bringing either a desperate hope that word would come or a soul-deep fear that her silence was itself an answer. His mother remained in London, a steady presence that kept him from complete dissolution. She did not ask about Eleanor's response, did not press him for details. Instead, she simply existed as a reminder that love, even when painful, was worth the risk. You are pacing again, she observed one evening, looking up from her embroidery. Alexander stopped, mid-stride, unaware he had been moving. Forgive me. There is nothing to forgive, though you might wear a track in that carpet if you continue much longer. She set down her needle, studying him with that penetrating gaze. Have you considered what you will do if she refuses to return? Every moment of every day. He moved to the window, always the window now, as though watching the street might somehow summon Eleanor's carriage into existence. I will accept her decision. What else can I do? How you could go to her? He turned sharply. She asked for time. I will not violate that request by appearing uninvited, even if your presence might help her decide. Especially then. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion pulling at him. I have spent months trying to control her, mother, trying to dictate the terms of our marriage through distance and coldness. I will not make the same mistake by forcing a reconciliation she may not want. His mother smiled, a small, sad curve of her lips. Your father never learned that lesson. Perhaps there is hope for you yet. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered with the regular post. Alexander recognized Eleanor's handwriting immediately and found his hands shaking as he broke the seal. Alexander, I have thought carefully about what you wrote. I have read your letter more times than I can count, searching for sincerity, for truth, for any sign that the man who wrote those words is real and not simply another version of the Duke who could not bear to look at me. I want to believe you. I want to return to London and discover that you meant every word. But I am afraid of hoping again when hope has brought me nothing but pain. Afraid of opening my heart to someone who has already shown me how easily he can close his own. So I am proposing a test of sorts, not because I wish to punish you, but because I need to know if the change you promise is genuine. I will return to London in 3 days. Time. But I will not return to the townhouse. I have taken rooms at the Clarendon Hotel. If you wish to see me, you may call there. We will begin again as though we are courting, slowly, carefully, with honesty between us. If this seems excessive or unreasonable, I will understand. You may write to inform me that our arrangement should continue as it was, a marriage of convenience and distance. I will accept that decision and trouble you no further with expectations of more. But if you are willing to try, truly willing, then I shall see you in 3 days. Eleanor Alexander read the letter 3 times, his heart hammering against his ribs. She was returning, not to him, not yet, but to London. And she was offering him a chance, a single, precious chance, to prove that he meant what he had written. He spent the next 3 days in a state of controlled panic. He visited his tailor, ordered new clothes, had his hair trimmed. He rehearsed conversations in his mind, discarding speeches that sounded too formal or too desperate. He reviewed every interaction they had ever had, searching for clues about what Eleanor truly wanted, what might convince her that he was capable of change. His mother watched all this with amusement and something like approval. Bring her flowers, she advised the morning of Eleanor's expected arrival. Not roses, too formal, something simpler. Violets, perhaps, or sweet peas. Mother, I am not a boy courting his first love. Are you not? She arched an eyebrow. Because from where I stand, that is precisely what you are. She was right, he realized. He was nervous in a way he had not been since his youth, before Catherine, before cynicism had hardened him into the cold man who had married Eleanor, expecting nothing and offering even less. The Clarendon was one of London's finest hotels, all elegant restraint and impeccable service. Alexander arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, the time Eleanor had specified in a brief note sent that morning, carrying a bouquet of violets that felt absurdly small in his hands. The concierge directed him to a private sitting room on the 2nd floor. Alexander climbed the stairs slowly, his heart in his throat, trying to prepare himself for whatever awaited. Eleanor sat by the window, backlit by the afternoon sun, and for a moment Alexander could only stand in the doorway and stare. She wore a dress of pale lavender, her dark hair swept up in a simple style that emphasized the elegant line of her neck. She looked thinner than when she had left, he thought. There were still shadows beneath her eyes, but there was also something new in her bearing, a quiet strength that had not been there before. She rose as he entered, her hands clasped before her, every inch the proper lady receiving a caller. "Your Grace," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Eleanor." He crossed the room and offered her the violets, feeling foolish and young and desperately hopeful. "I brought these. I remembered. You mentioned once that they were your favorite." Surprise flickered across her face. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you have ever told me. I simply was too much a fool to acknowledge it." She took the flowers, her fingers brushing his briefly. The contact sent a jolt through him, and he saw from the slight widening of her eyes that she had felt it too. "Please," she said, gesturing to the chairs arranged near the fireplace. "Sit." They sat facing each other, the space between them small in distance but enormous in significance. Alexander searched for the right words, the perfect thing to say that would convince her he was sincere. But Eleanor spoke first. "I need you to understand why I left," she said quietly. "It was not simply your coldness or your distance, though those were painful enough. It was the sense that I was invisible to you, that I could have been anyone, any woman of suitable breeding and fortune, and you would have treated her exactly the same. I did. Not exist to you as Eleanor, only as the Duchess of Ashford, a role to be filled." "You are right," he said, the admission difficult but necessary. "I did see you that way, at first. And now? Now I see you as the woman who tried so hard to reach me when I gave her nothing but walls. The woman who managed my household with grace and my social obligations with patience and my coldness with a dignity I did not deserve. The woman whose absence has made every room in my house feel empty. He leaned forward, willing her to believe him. I see you, Eleanor. Perhaps for the first time I truly see you, and what I see terrifies me. Why? Because loving you means risking the kind of pain I swore I would never allow myself to feel again. He told her then about Catherine, about his father, about 15 years of building walls and calling it strength, of choosing safety over vulnerability, of convincing himself that feeling nothing was better than feeling too much. Eleanor listened. Without interrupting, her dark eyes fixed on his face, and he saw understanding dawn in her expression. So when you married me, she said slowly, you were already determined to keep me at a distance. Yes, I thought it was kinder, thought that if I never allowed you to hope, you could never be disappointed. He laughed bitterly. I told myself I was protecting you when I was only protecting myself. And now? Now I understand that protection without connection is just another word for prison. I was so afraid of being hurt that I hurt you instead. And in doing so I became exactly like my father, cold and alone and surrounded by everything except what mattered. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving to the window, to the London street beyond. You wrote in your letter that you loved me. I do. I love you more than I thought myself capable of loving anyone. But love is not enough, Alexander. You must know that. Catherine taught you that lesson, and I have. Learned it myself these past months. Love without trust, without vulnerability, without the willingness to be hurt. That is not really love at all. I know. He reached for her hand, then stopped, unsure if he had the right. She saw the gesture and slowly extended her fingers, allowing him to take them in his own. Her hand was small and cold, and he wrapped both of his around it, trying to offer warmth. I cannot promise I will be perfect, he said quietly. I cannot promise that 15 years of fear will simply vanish because I have admitted to loving you. There will be moments when my first instinct is to retreat, to protect myself with distance. I know that. But I am asking you to call me back when I retreat, to demand honesty when I try to hide, to fight with me and for me, and to refuse to let me become again the man who drove you away. He squeezed her hand gently. I am asking you to help me become someone worthy of your love, because I do not think I can do it. Alone. Eleanor's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You hurt me, Alexander. You hurt me so deeply that there were nights I could barely breathe from the weight of it. I know, and I am sorrier for that than I have words to express. And yet I never stopped hoping. A single tear escaped, tracing down her cheek. Even when I knew hope was foolish, even when I told myself to accept the reality of our marriage and expect nothing more, some part of me kept hoping that you would see me, that you would care. He released her hand and knelt before her chair, taking both her hands in his, looking up into her face with every defense stripped away. I see you, Eleanor. I care. And if you give me the chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving that your hope was not misplaced. She looked down at him, this powerful duke kneeling at her feet, and saw the truth in his eyes, the fear and the love and the desperate, fragile hope that mirrored her own. Stand up, she whispered. Please. Alexander, stand up. He rose and she rose with him, and suddenly they were standing very close, the air between them charged with possibility. I am afraid, she said quietly, afraid of believing you and being disappointed again. So am I. He raised one hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek with his fingertips. But I think perhaps courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to love despite the fear, choosing to hope even when hope seems foolish. Eleanor closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, and he felt something in his chest break open. All the loneliness and longing of the past months, all the feelings he had suppressed and denied, rushing through him with devastating force. Eleanor, he whispered, and she opened her eyes, and he saw his own hope reflected there. I want to try, she said. I want to believe that we can build something real from the ruins of what we began. But you must promise me something. Anything. Promise me that you... Will talk to me, that when you are afraid or hurt or confused, you will not retreat into silence. Promise me honesty, even when it is painful, especially when it is painful. I promise. He moved his hand from her cheek to her hair, tangling his fingers in the dark strands. And I promise to spend every day proving that you were right to give me this chance. She smiled then, a real smile that lit her entire face, and Alexander felt his world shift and settle into a new configuration, one where Eleanor stood at the center, and everything else revolved around her. "May I kiss you?" he asked, the question rough. "I am your wife, Alexander. You need not ask permission." "Yes, I do. I have claimed too many things without asking. This, at least, I will do properly." Her smile widened. "Then yes, you may kiss me." He lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, to pull away, to maintain the distance that had defined their marriage. But Eleanor rose onto her, tiptoes meeting him halfway, and when their lips touched, Alexander felt 15 years of walls crumble to dust. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people learning each other for the first time despite months of marriage. But then Eleanor's hands came up to his shoulders, and he pulled her closer, and the gentleness gave way to hunger, for connection, for intimacy, for all the things they had denied themselves. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "Come home," he whispered. "Please, Eleanor, come home." "Not yet." She pulled back slightly, her hands still on his shoulders. "We will court properly first. You will call on me here. We will take walks in the park and attend the theater, and have conversations where we actually speak to each other like two people who wish to know each other. And then? And then, when I am certain that you mean what you say, when I have seen that you can be vulnerable without retreating, when I trust that you will not break my heart again, then I will come home." It was not the answer he wanted. He wanted her in his house, in his bed, in his life, immediately and irrevocably. But he understood what she was asking for, proof that his transformation was real, that he could maintain vulnerability beyond the first flush of reconciliation. "How long?" he asked. "As long as it takes." She smiled, softening the words. "But I do not think it will be very long. You have waited months to speak to me honestly. I suspect you will not be able to contain yourself for more than a few weeks." She was right. Over the following days, Alexander called on Eleanor every afternoon, bringing flowers and books and stories from his childhood he had never shared with anyone. They walked through Hyde Park, talking about everything and nothing. They attended the theater, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched, and afterward discussed the performance over dinner in quiet. Restaurants where no one knew the Duke and Duchess of Ashford. Slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Eleanor told him about her childhood, about her loneliness as an only child in a great house, about the books she had loved, and the dreams she had harbored. Alexander told her about the weight of the title, about his father's coldness, about the boy he had been before cynicism had hardened him. And through it all, he practiced vulnerability. When he felt himself wanting to retreat, he said, so aloud. When old fears surfaced, he shared them rather than hiding. When Eleanor asked difficult questions, he answered honestly, even when the truth was painful. 2 weeks into their courtship, they were walking through the park when Eleanor stopped suddenly, turning to face him. "I am ready," she said simply. "Ready for what?" "To come home, to truly try at our marriage, to be your wife in more than name." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You have proven yourself, Alexander. You have been honest and vulnerable and patient. You have courted me as though we are choosing each other for the first time, and I find that I want to choose you, not because duty demands it, but because my heart does." Alexander felt something swell in his chest, too large for words. He pulled her close, there in the middle of the path with afternoon walkers passing by, and kissed her with all the love and relief and gratitude he felt. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "Thank you for giving me a second chance, for seeing past what I was to what I could become, for loving me when I gave you every reason not to. Thank you for finally letting me see you," she replied. "The real you beneath all the walls. He is worth loving, Alexander. I hope you know that." They returned to the townhouse that evening together. The servants lined up to welcome the Duchess home, and Alexander saw the relief on their faces. They had known, of course, had understood better than he had what his coldness was doing to Eleanor. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Alexander knocked on Eleanor's chamber door. She opened it herself, still dressed in her dinner gown, her hair loose around her shoulders as it had been on their wedding night. "May I come in?" he asked. She stepped back, allowing him entry into rooms he had never entered, though they existed in his own house. He looked around, seeing the careful way she had made the space her own. Books on the shelves, watercolors. On the walls, violets in a vase by the window. "I was wrong," he said, turning to face her, "to stay away on our wedding night, to stay away all the nights after. I told myself I was being merciful, but I was only being a coward." Eleanor closed the distance between them, placing her hand on his chest, over his heart. "We cannot change the past, Alexander. We can only choose what we do now." "Then I choose you." He covered her hand with his own. "I choose this. I choose us. Every day for the rest of my life." She rose onto her tiptoes and kissed him, and he gathered her into his arms, and for the first time, Alexander Blackwood allowed himself to believe that love was not weakness, but strength. That vulnerability was not danger, but courage. That opening his heart was not risking destruction, but embracing life. And as Eleanor led him toward the bed, as they began again what they had started months ago with vows and hope, Alexander understood what Catherine had meant when she wrote, "That love was not enough." She had been right. Love alone was not enough. But love combined with honesty, with vulnerability, with the courage to keep choosing each other even when it was difficult, that was everything. That was enough to last a lifetime. 1 year later, the Duke and Duchess of Ashford stood in the portrait gallery at Ashford Hall, looking up at the newest edition, a painting of them together, commissioned to mark their first anniversary. In it, they stood close, Alexander's hand, resting possessively at Eleanor's waist, her head tilted slightly toward his shoulder. But it was their faces that told the true story, the warmth in his eyes, the joy in her smile, the unmistakable connection between two people who had found each other despite everything working against them. "We look happy," Eleanor observed. "We are happy." Alexander pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You made me happy, even when I was determined to be miserable. You did the work yourself. I simply refused to let you hide." He laughed, a sound that came easily now, and thought about the man he had been a year ago, cold and distant and desperately lonely. That man felt like a stranger, someone he had been in another life. "I received a letter from Ravenscroft," Eleanor mentioned casually. Alexander felt a flicker of the old jealousy but pushed it aside. "Oh? He is engaged. To Lady Hartwell's daughter. He sounds genuinely happy. Good. He deserves happiness, even if he did try to. Steal my wife. He did not try to steal me. He simply offered me kindness when I needed it." She turned in his arms, looking up at him seriously. "And you should thank him for it someday. His kindness made me realize what I deserved. It helped me find the courage to demand more from you. Then I am in his debt." Alexander cupped her face in his hands, marveling as he always did at the miracle of her presence. "Though I still do not like how he looked at you." Eleanor laughed. "Foolish man, as though I could see anyone but you." Later that night, as they lay together in the ducal chambers, Eleanor had finally agreed to share them, though she still kept her own rooms for mornings when she wanted solitude. Alexander thought about all the ways his life had changed. His relationship with his mother had deepened. He spent less time hiding in his study and more time actually living. He had even begun to enjoy society, now that he had Eleanor at his side to share observations and laughter. But, more than any external change, he had changed internally. He had learned to feel without fear, to love without walls, to trust that vulnerability was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. Eleanor stirred against him, already half asleep. "I know," she murmured. "You tell me every day, and I will continue to tell you every day for the rest of our lives." She smiled against his chest. "Then I am the most fortunate woman in England." "No," Alexander said quietly, holding her close as she drifted into sleep. "I am the most fortunate man, because you gave me something I thought I had lost forever." "What is that?" she asked drowsily. "Hope," he said, "and a second chance to deserve it." In the darkness, Eleanor's hand found his and squeezed gently, and Alexander closed his eyes, surrounded by the warmth of her presence and the knowledge that he was finally truly home.